I'm Tony Lockwood, founder of Thompson Wright Partners, and I'm delighted to welcome you to the latest episode of Inside Track, where I discuss business transformation journeys with leading figures in industry. Unfortunately, projects sometimes go wrong, and at that time, challenges exist, conflicts are created, and third parties are often introduced into the process to try to resolve the conflict. My guest today, Richard Kerr, is one of those people. A lawyer by background, he has had extensive experience of resolving conflict in transformation programs, many around technology programs, but his lessons and his experiences are applicable to all change initiatives. So I'm delighted to welcome Richard to the podcast today. Thanks, Richard, for joining us today. I think when we met a couple of weeks ago, I sort of realised straight away that you had a really interesting background that obviously influences your approach to delivering change and transformation. So, let's start by just giving the listeners a little bit more about that background.
Sure. Thanks, Tony. Yeah. So I've got a background. It began with law and then moved into technology. And then about 20 years ago, I joined an organization who were bringing technology and law together, but very much in the dispute space and the contention space. And that's primarily because they worked as expert witnesses. And what an expert witness does is he she goes in to evaluate a particular situation from a technical perspective in order to give an opinion to generally the court or to the lawyers, and to help generally the judges understand the extent to which, from a practical perspective, people were delivering what they should have.
Yeah.
And really from there, a lot of the stuff I did was just getting involved in the messy end of the business, primarily technology, primarily outsourcing, primarily when things just hadn't gone particularly well. And the dispute stuff was okay, and but what I noticed really was that it was always the same causal factors, or very often the same causal factors. The manifestation of the problems differed a little bit, but it was the same causal factors. And so what I found was I used to get called into review situations, and those reviews began to happen earlier and earlier and earlier in the life cycle. And through a quite a long period of root cause analysis, I started to create sort of systems and frameworks which would just systematically remove the root causal factors of failures. And that spans people factors, technology factors, commercial factors, legal factors, and of course change and transformational change factors as well. So yeah, I guess really just to sum it all up, maybe the last 20-25 years, I've probably reviewed in excess of 250 matters and advised probably on the same number. And really it's my major desire is to try and see serious improvements to the levels of success in major transformational projects.
Yes, and that's the interesting part then, because then you've segued into being instrumental in delivering those change and transformations, and helping organisations set up things in the right way so that they don't fall foul of some of the challenges that you've experienced with some of in your earlier career, shall we say?
Yeah, exactly, and really, if what I found is it's about getting an early sighting of all the factors and how they interrelate. Yeah, very often these things are thought of in silos. So the lawyers will be in one silo, and the commercial managers in another, and the procurement people in another, the techies in another, the delivery people in another, and then the transformational guys just trying to be the conductor of all these different elements and more besides. But some of these, of course, each of these factors has a number of kind of fairly deep roots, and really it's a case of understanding how they all kind of interrelate and interoperate. And once that understanding takes place, then it's so much easier to construct a very holistic approach to the transformational journey, which not just articulates where things are now and what the future operating model needs to be, but it also ensures that you've got a very strong bridge whereby everybody can traverse from A to B.
No, absolutely, and I think that's critical, isn't it? Especially, I know one of the things that we spoke about previously was that a lot of the work that you've done within technology-enabled businesses or technology-enabled change and transformation. But it's apparent in everything, because more often than not, there's third parties involved and there's contracts involved with those third parties, and it's getting everyone aligned, isn't it? And understanding, as you say, that vision of where we're trying to get to, and all too often, as you just said, those are almost little individual teams operating in a silo, doing their little bit in the process without understanding the end-to-end elements, and that's where things very often go wrong.
Indeed, absolutely, and really the getting people aligned and agreed is just, to me, the single biggest factor. And so, it commences, of course, with the vision and the objectives and the outcomes that everyone's seeking to achieve, and getting the internal team to be fully aligned across all the executive and other stakeholders, which, as we all know, is much easier said than done, Tony. But I mean, but starting off with that. And then once that element has been aligned and agreed, and people are aware of what it is that they're seeking to achieve and why they're seeking to achieve it, often what I found is there's an understanding really of where we are now, where we'd like to get to, but it's how we get there cohesively is the bit that takes some figuring out. And as you've said, generally speaking, the capability doesn't reside within the organization. They need to reach outside for a whole bunch of new skills, whether that's to resource the PMO or internal teams or what have you. But more often than not, particularly when it comes to technology, etc., you're going to have to be buying new platforms, new products. You'll have an entire legacy ecosystem of contracts and suppliers, etc. And so it's a case really of understanding maybe the enterprise architecture from a technology perspective, but also from a contractual ecosystem perspective, and understanding where are we now, where are we going to get to, and what particular and what mechanically must we do to exit and maintain business as usual and seamless transition as we move from point A to point B. And part of that requires a great deal of kind of stakeholder management, because very often it's quite difficult to put contracts, if you will, around this stuff to make people behave well together. It requires a bit more than that. But equally, for all the new providers, it's about helping them to understand what your journey is and what you're seeking to get to. And very often, that just is not articulated particularly well, because a common tendering stroke procurement style process is slap some stuff down on paper, chuck it out to the market. The market, generally speaking, won't have a chance to dialogue very well with the buyer, so they'll have to interpret the requirement. They'll say yes to everything because they know that if they don't, they won't win the business. And then it's a matter of interpretation, ambiguity, and the usual fun and games that people find themselves in these kind of conversations later on. It doesn't have to be that way, I think, is my resounding message. There is a way of going about these particular phases whereby you can actually structure your market engagement in such a way whereby the entire thing is designed, whereby the buyer is saying to the market, look, we think we might know how we get there, but we understand that this is your expertise in your space, and what we're actually looking for is for you to bring your smarts to help us to understand, have we articulated our requirements in the right way? Are they just daft? Can you improve upon them? Is that a silly way? Here's our outcome. How can you help us to get to our outcome? And then contracting on that basis.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that's the key, isn't it? It's all too often, I've been involved in programs over many years where, we've used external consultancies, we've used technology businesses, partners, outsourcing organisations, the whole gambit really. But as you say, all too often, when the organisation's gone through the procurement process up front, they probably have got very, very little knowledge about what it's going to look like moving forward. That clarity of vision isn't there, and it's certainly not. Even if it is shared amongst, it tends to be shared amongst a very small group of senior people or senior stakeholders, but not necessarily shared with the procurement function that's going out trying to engage these external parties. And it's only when you get those parties through on a contract that's generally kept quite loose in terms of scope, but quite tight in terms of liabilities from an organisation perspective, that the clarity starts to come through as you work through the process. But then you're in this situation where the partner's saying, well, actually, that's not what we've contracted to, or we haven't got the right framework, so we're having to go back and renegotiate, and then you end up getting division or conflict, and at the worst possible time in the program. So
yeah,
I'm interested just to understand a little bit more about those. What can organisations do, or what do the good organisations do to ensure that that is a much more of a seamless process up front?
yeah. Well, in terms of steps, Tony, I mean, the first step is really understanding, as you said, internally what they're seeking to achieve, and finding a way to cross-pollinate that, not just amongst the top exec, but down to the procurement people and those in between, because as of course we know with any transformational change, the sooner we can get some engagement of multiple different parties, the better it is. I found that command and control and keeping people in the dark doesn't work particularly well. So that's the first thing, having some clarity as to what the outcomes are that they're seeking to achieve. Now from there, I think the second thing is just a maturity and understanding that even if we do know precisely what our requirements are today, the only thing we can be certain of is that they're going to change. And so having the flexibility around that change is going to be very, very important. And so if you've got something very tightly coupled, it doesn't change very easily. If you've got something loosely coupled, it does. But each of them require governance of their own nature. And what I found to be by far the most effective way is to start off with a fairly loose structure as you go to market. You've given some very significant thought as to the type of partner that you're looking for. If you know exactly what you want, then you're literally looking to direct people. You're looking for a bums on seat contract, basically. Get the team and then tell them what to do. And sometimes that's really effective. Other times the organisation might be, look, a classic example is during the last austerity round. You know, councils were told, you've got to slash your costs by 30%. And a council would say, well, I've no idea how to do that. And one council just went out to tender saying, we've got to slash our costs by 30%. We're looking for a transformational partner that will help us do that. We don't care how you do it. That's the outcome we need to achieve. And essentially, that's a very incredibly loosely coupled contract. What I found is something kind of in the middle, whereby it's all to do with how the business currently operates and how the business wishes to operate in the future. And then finding out early via a gap analysis and discussion and dialogue as to what things are achievable, what things aren't achievable, and what things are achievable in a different way to that in which we originally envisaged. The outcome being that at the end of that, you'll have you'll have something that's been arrived at with the market on a mutually agreed basis, and it's going to be reflective of the solution that's required, but also the steps to achieving that solution, and also the resourcing requirements and roles and responsibilities and what have you around all of that. The products and the platforms, obviously all the license and gubbins and like that, but most importantly as well, I think a commercially incentivizing structure which ensures that all the teams are focused on the same goal and are rewarded accordingly. And then whatever the suitable governance structure is around that. Within that mix is having a really clued up sponsor and proper executive involvement, encouragement, and also very good delegated authority and decision making understood going down the levels in order that decision making can be done quickly without having to keep going back up the chain. There's an analogy which I read from the Standish Group and that summed up the importance of decision making really wonderfully. Let's take a project that has 1,000 decision points. Project 1 has every decision requires 22 people sat around a table. It takes 6 hours each decision, and then once the decision made, 50% of them are overturned before the week is out. Yeah. Versus another one which has a emotionally mature team of 6 people. They take 1 hour to make a decision, and none of them are overturned. The first project, 22 hours times 6 people, 6 hours times 1,000 decision points, with 50% being reversed. As you can see, that project will never ever get completed, and it'll be a very frustrating one to be in. The second one, fast decision tempo. Some of those decisions will be wrong because they've been taken quickly. However, the next part is having the maturity to say, okay, we're happy to make a mistake as long as we don't brush it under the carpet. Because we'll get to our end outcome that much quicker. And so essentially, how do you do it? You do it by architecting things in such a way whereby you're really putting in things which are going to incentivize the executive stakeholders from both organizations to get aligned in terms of vision and strategy, to get aligned in terms of commercial matters, whereby it's going to be a win-win, and preferably a win-win-win relationship, a long-term win for both parties. And then getting the executives to empower their teams underneath them, getting the teams whereby they're empowered and engaged and enthused, and not afraid to make mistakes and to take decisions. And then finally feeding into the business, the clients, the customers, and the legacy providers and the new providers, the good governance comms and elements which will really help them to take that journey and keep them aware of what's going on, and then engage them what's going on, and then help them by training them and transitioning them and flowering them hopefully into the transformation as things go by. So a lot of different factors, but
no, absolutely,
more in the right tension is the key. Every project will be different. Understanding the factors and then understanding the tensions is the key to it.
Yeah, but I think the one of the key things that you've said, and you've said it so many times already, is having clarity about the outcomes, and you haven't said outputs, you've said outcomes.
Yes.
And I always remember going back to the very first of these podcasts with Christoph, and he emphasised the need to focus on outcomes, not outputs. But all too often, in my experience, when you are putting a contract together or a commercial arrangement together, the procurement, the legal, in fact, some of the senior people within organisations want it to be really, really clearly defined on outputs rather than outcomes, because outputs are probably a lot easier to measure and give the tick on whether it's been achieved or not than outcomes that can be could be, as you say, can change and can be adapted. But what's been your experience of that, where almost I totally agree with the approach that you suggested being the right approach, but how have you found organisations, procurement, senior members, the legal fraternity within the organisation? How have you found they have adapted to that approach?
I think it's safe to say. I mean, if we go through each particular lens, the legal guys, and they are trained, very well trained risk managers, and it's and really, in my experience, the really, really good ones have a bifold lens around risk. The first is protecting the client, that they are going to get whatever it is that someone said they were going to give them. But the second is understanding growing the pie. Is an expression, and essentially, it's like not only is there the protection element, that's a given. You've got to have a safety net if someone just doesn't step up and deliver. You've got to find that. You've got to have the remedies in place to be able to get people to do what they need to do. But the much bigger, more inspirational part of it is, okay, if we deliver this, then what's in it for everybody? What's the overarching why to all of this, and what might that then blossom into? And then that's a much more hearty sort of conversation. And so, in a way, from the legal side of it, that's a good starting point to try and help that in place. We will never ever get away from the fact that a good, strong contract is very well defined. An agreement to agree, which is we'll sort this out later. That is not a contractually binding provision whatsoever. It's just gloss. And so having certainty and clarity and commitment and confidence of everything is the ideal kind of nirvana, I guess, from a legal perspective, and probably from a buying organization and from a provider as well. Having that clarity is just amazing. But for that, just with the maturity to understand it will change, stuff will happen, and we just need to be flexible as to how this thing will embrace change, not just people change, but also sort of technical change, contractual change, commercial change, etc. and how good provisions around that. Around actually contracting for outcomes, that is quite a tricky one, and you've got to be quite, you've got to adapt that and bespoke that to the matter in hand. What I found works best, Tony, is it starts with why. You know, get the biggest outcomes understood at the outset, because we always need to be sense checking. Okay, fine, we've delivered these outputs, but in terms of actually why, are we still on track for this, or have we lost our way because we're just in the detail over here? And so, you know, the why by way of vision, the why by way of objectives, and then cascading down into things like the business process, or the management information required, or the customer experience, or whatever the driver is for that. And there will be you know, lag indicators and lead indicators, which, you know, and various elements like this. Now, I find personally that if you can leave the contract down early-ish, whereby you're not trying to constrain people into what the contract provisions are going to be, but you just get a discussion going whereby the parties have a meeting of the minds, whereby one party is confident they can deliver what they're committing to, and the other party is confident that that's actually going to fit the bill. And when they have that comfort, at that point you can enshrine it with contractual elements around it. Now, that, people, it's a no-brainer. It's easier said than done, don't get me wrong. But in a way, everyone can then see, right, good, we're committing whatever it is, millions of pounds or whatever to this initiative. But we've got some certainty of outcome, and we've also got an aligned supplier, provider, partner, whatever we like to say, team, who are all confident they can actually deliver it. And we've got in place the behavioural and the people and the change and the technical and delivery, etc. factors in place, which are all pointing in a way whereby we can see that this thing is on course, or we've got good ways to readjust the course if it goes slightly wonky. You are right, Tony. It does require a slight change in perspective, because not many people do it this way. But those that do it this way experience vastly improved results for obvious reasons.
Yeah. I think it's a maturity factor, isn't it? I think you probably have needed to have gone through some of the pain of getting it wrong,
yeah,
to almost have I was going to say bravery, that's the wrong term, but you know what I mean, that sort of be prepared to go through that exercise up front, because that could take some time, absolutely, and often will take a lot of time to get people aligned, to get people understanding how this will work in signing up to it, but on all sides of the equation.
yeah.
But it's time, it's investment, and that investment will reap its rewards moving forward. But all too often, you're running to get the project kicked off and to get the project started.
Yeah.
And you don't spend enough time really getting all the ducks in a row.
Yeah.
It's, I suppose, I think it's probably, you need to have got some pain from doing it that way before you maybe have the bravery to really enforce that upfront piece of work that we've been talking about.
Yeah, well, I mean, what I've you know, you're exactly right, Tony, and you know, as we know, the road is littered with that pain, you know, because the vast majority of them do experience snags or problems or fail completely at a huge cost. And you know, no doubt there'll be an awful lot of press given to the amount of money which has been spent on apps during the COVID, for instance, and there's a lot of money has been thrown at that. And really, what I'd be always keen to ensure is to really understand what the drivers are of the organization and how quickly they need to get somewhere. You know, if we take the three largest elements, leaving aside people, the three largest elements of legal and commercial and technology and solution and delivery and governance, those three elements, you know, legal, commercial, delivery and governance, and technology and solution. Sometimes the only important thing is that you've got to get this thing done very, very quickly. You know, at that point, the focus really, we might as well leave legal and commercial behind a little bit, because actually our focus has got to be on solution and how quickly we can get there, and just how do we prove that this has been effective. At that point, it's a case of just reaching into the other lessons learned, which is, okay, well, in order to deliver a project really quickly and really effectively, what's the global benchmark? What's all the global lessons learned that can give us? We can have as many lessons learned ourselves from all of our experience, but reaching out for global stuff as well is really important. It's kind of, okay, fine, well, a team size of this shape, with this type of people, having these types of input, having this type of measurement, et cetera, et cetera. And as we can see with Agile, as we can see with things like, the minimum viable product idea, sometimes the provider is almost embarrassed to release the minimum viable product, but they do so with a very, very clear ambition, which is that not a minute is going to be spent in wasted development time. You're only going to be responding back to what people actually want, and then finding out what they actually want and making sure that user voice that you're hearing is actually the right one is the next trick. But having that team, having that quick iteration, and then getting to the final output and outcome, at that point, you're in is, okay, what's absolutely best practice for what works well in terms of delivery, or product development, or product management, or whatever that meant. Other times, it may be, let's say, a public sector purchase, and they may well be going through, I don't know, one of their framework agreements because it makes it much quicker. So they might use technology services framework, or they might use management consultancy framework. Now, for that, it's actually starting with this contract. And so that's the basis of the deal. And so essentially at that point, you need to pivot your focus to say, okay, fine, whatever else has got to happen, we've got to make this contract as being the governing document. So we've got to make it simple to understand, we've got to make it reflective, and we've got to make sure it's mutually incentivizing and quite equitable, while still protecting. And so essentially at that point, it's a bit of a deep dive. What does the contract say? How's it supposed to operate? What do the schedules look like? How can we populate those in the best possible way, in a good dialogue with the market once again, until such times we've got a final product, which will then enshrine our delivery. And again, at that point, your project or program plan looks very different, because you have to follow a certain procurement methodology, etc., because it's dictated and stipulated in the framework. You have to then sort of use your model to get the terms of reference correct for filling in the frameworks and the schedules. And then you have to do the training and knowledge transfer to all those who are actually going to deliver it, to actually understand what the heck the contract says, what it means, and how that then ensures delivery and governance, and how you would report on it, etc., from the higher level, and get the insights you need to see whether the thing is on track. So two separate sort of starting points there. One, legal and commercial as the basis, the other one, just delivery as the basis. Both of them work absolutely fine. It's always a case of understanding, the precise situation in which that transformation finds itself, and then how best can we achieve the ambitions and the timescales and the budgets available.
Yeah, I think it was what was it, Stephen Covey, that says start with the end in mind, isn't it? And that's what it is, isn't it? It's let's be clear about what we need to get to and why we need to get there, and what's the drivers, and then come back and make sure that we put everything in place that's going to allow the combined entities, third-party organisations, internal stakeholders, departments, or to get into that one clarity, that very, very clear place about how we're going to get there.
Exactly.
And then, as you say, we go along, and we know as you go along, stuff happens, and you'll have to take a diversion somewhere along the line. But actually, if you've got that absolute clarity of vision, and you are operating as one team with that clarity, combined clarity, then you can overcome those obstacles, overcome those diversions really easily.
Yeah, absolutely, much easier indeed. And you've also got the beauty as well of having a senior leadership team understanding what's going on and understanding the rationale for it. And I find that particularly by looking at things through this more sort of holistic lens, and having all of those people in the room, they'll all understand not just their bit, but also how it fits into the jigsaw of the whole. And my personal experience of that saves so much. It saves so much time and frustration perhaps, but B, it just starts things off with a very, very, very good situation. Equally, Tony, we've just talked about stuff at the outset of projects and programs and getting that set up right too. Very often, if they are going a bit snaggy, sometimes it's well, very often actually, my experiences come from that lens, and equally then, it's real case of saying, okay, fine, okay, we understand the symptom, we understand how this is manifesting. There's delays, there's cost overruns, there's fitness for purpose, there's quality, there's people issues, there's all this other stuff. But the question is really, okay, what are the root causes of all these particular elements, and is it going to be possible for us to not only identify the root cause and also what the solution might be, but to get that agreed with all the other players to make sure that we can reset this thing, realign, and refocus and redeliver. And equally then the senior leadership team being on board. And sometimes, Tony, it's not that happy that things can get realigned and redone, but having that kind of holistic view at that point of exactly where things stand at least allows everybody the cognizance to understand, okay, fine, actually this one isn't going to work out very well for us. Best that we just talk about disengaging and doing it a slightly different way, because I'm sure we've all been stuck in zombie projects where it just can't, it just keeps going and going and going. And actually it would just be in everybody's best interest to disengage and go about it a different way. And sometimes just having these reviews and just getting the data that you need for the insights, you're giving you the clarity and the certainty and the best options available. My goodness, saves an awful lot of time and money, and most importantly, allows people to then refocus into the business case and the benefits which were originally envisaged, or which might need to be redesigned and reconsidered.
Absolutely, but it's having access to those data points, isn't it, and that insight into when things are not going according to plan. Let's keep a note of them. Let's, as you say, reflect on them. Let's review them, so that a sort of mountain's not created out of a molehill type of stuff. Because there's got to be loads of those sort of things, but it's usually a case where they're not covered off early doors, and something else comes on, and something else comes on, and something else comes on, and suddenly what could have got resolved quite easily and quite quickly by getting around the table and chatting it through and understanding what needs to change suddenly becomes a massive issue, and then you almost at loggerheads with the different parties.
Yeah.
And at that stage, everyone's lost sight of what we're trying to, what we're combined we're trying to achieve. Yeah. It's all about sort of like making sure that we win and you lose, and that's never a recipe for success.
No, exactly, and it gets very positional, and then it gets entrenched, and it's very, very difficult to dig people out from that perspective. Yeah, I mean, a key thing I see on again and again, I'm sure we all do. I call it watermelon reporting personally. It's green on the outside and red on the inside, and and so the senior team are seeing green, 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 and then suddenly it goes red everywhere, and it's like, wow, what happened there? And so essentially having some assurance in place, which is independent, who's able to call stuff out as they see it, can be incredibly useful. That's one. Yeah. That's one good thing to stop that outcome you mentioned there, Tony. And the other thing I found is particularly helpful, because they are commercial arrangements, and so it's having both parties understanding, really, I say both parties, but everybody actually understanding what their true role is, and really, if you start things off on the basis of we're going to the market because we're not experts in the tech, because we're not experts in how to deliver your thing in the best possible way. Yeah, we are experts in what we do currently and probably where we're trying to get to. But we will be relying very much upon your expertise, Mr. Provider, Mr. Partner, whatever, to help us in these things. And so putting upon them, and if they're a consultant worth their salt, they'll like that role anyway. Yeah, good. I can advise. This is what blah blah blah. This is what. Blah, blah, blah. Everyone should be happy to do that. But as long as there's a sort of, I'd say a commercially, a contractually sort of enshrining principle in there to say, look, this is your role. And so what that means is we're wanting you to look around corners for us and to call stuff out for us. We're wanting that level of honesty and challenge if we're doing something blooming stupid. And again, and having that level of honesty and clarity and integrity kind of built into the arrangement, and basically going to the market in the first instance saying, do you know what, if you're not prepared to play that role, you're not the partner we're looking for. That can be really, really helpful, Tony, because at that point, if stuff has been pushed under the carpet, you know, there's very little argument at that point. It's kind of, guys, we'd ask you to actually alert us to this because that's really your space, you know. And so essentially, you know, not to make too big a deal of it, but I found that that is a crucial point, really, because very often it might be a case of, well, you told me to do it that way. That's just not going to work very well, because that's, you know, if you see what I mean. Yeah.
No, absolutely. And it reminds me of it's building that team out, isn't it? And it's understanding the various roles that each team member plays. And actually the strength, the success will be determined by the strength of the team and the ability of all those individuals to deliver the piece of the jigsaw almost. And you know, I use sporting analogies a lot, and you know, you can have the best attacking players in the world, but if you've got a leaky defence, you're not going to win many games. And,
Yes.
and it's the same principle, isn't it? When we're looking at transformation programs, you know, when we bring all the various elements of that team together, being clear about what your role is within that team and where we're trying to get to is critical in determining success.
Absolutely, 1,000,000%. I do some work with some guys over in the States and Europe called the Standish Group, and they've been evaluating success and failure in projects since 1994, and I've always kept an eye on their data to see what's coming up. It's always been consistent. There's always like a 2/3 success, 2/3 of projects, 1/3 are successful. Let's put it that way. 1/5 fail completely, and the ones in the middle kind of hit challenges. I don't think that comes as a huge surprise, but equally they also feed in their learnings and what's working better and what isn't. And I found it fascinating that although their field is primarily software projects, that after 25 or 26 years of research, in 2020 what they published was their final kind of thinking on this. And it's in terms of what is required for things to work well. They said you need three things: a good sponsor, good teams, and a good place. And they basically just boxed into those three elements. Now there's obviously elements of goodness, if you will, that's articulated under those three headings. But what I found really quite fascinating was, although they've studied failure for so long, technology and didn't feature in as one of those failures. And I reached out to them actually. I said, well, you know, my experience as well is that you need a good procurement and a good contract, as well as a good team, a good place, and a good sponsor, which they agreed with, and we did a piece on that. But the important thing is that the good contracts, the good team, the good supplier relationship management, those good elements, they all fit within the good place. And essentially, you know, you've got that good place thing happening, whereby the project and the program has the level of backing, but also the level of not isolation, but support, cotton wool, if you will, whereby they can just go and focus and get their stuff done. And a good sponsor will kind of shield them to a certain extent and have the necessary conversations around the business. And I personally found that to be a really interesting finding from them, and I think helpful too, because so much of it is to do with the people and how that all.
But I think you're absolutely right. The role of the sponsor is essential, and we've all had experiences of sponsors taking on the responsibility but not really believing in the program or whatever. They didn't duck the head quick enough at the board meeting when it was allocated. But equally, I'm sure we've all had experience of working with a really good sponsor that will give you that space and will be that buffer and will keep the team giving that sort of space for the team to work in isolation and take all the flack from the rest of the business, and that's absolutely critical.
Exactly. And so often, and without that good sponsor, I go so far as to suggest it's hardly worth really embarking, because it's so important to have that level of executive sponsorship, because these things are expensive. You know, big transformational programs, They require so much to go right for them to be successful, and having that sponsorship and knowing you've got that baked in at the outset is really the key, I'd say, for someone to know they've whether something is stacking up well for them or otherwise.
Totally agree. Totally. So we fascinating discussion. Thank you very much. We always finish with one final question, which is, what's your one takeaway? What's the one thing that you feel is absolutely essential in delivering successful transformation?
Yeah, I'd say really for successful transformation, you need a clear understanding of where you are now, a clear understanding of where you want to be, a clear understanding of why and those outcomes, and then a very robust bridge to understand all the elements that need to be transported from one side to the other successfully for it to be delivered well.
Brilliant. That's an excellent way to end this podcast. So thank you very much, Richard.
Thank you, Tony. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Richard. That was great. Again, a very different perspective that we've introduced today, and one I'm sure will lead to much discussion in the future with those operating in change and transformation. So I'm sure we'll get some questions and look forward to responding to those with you in due course. If you haven't already, please check out the Transformation Leaders Hub. It's a place where change and transformation leaders come together, share experiences, get involved with new opportunities, and really build their network and build relationships. And as we know, relationships create opportunities. So definitely a place to go and check out if you haven't already. With that, I look forward to seeing you again in a couple of weeks' time with the next Inside Track podcast. Thank you very much. Bye.